deployable troops available in Melbourne at the time. The main units were all logistic, the supply battalions and so forth at places like Broadmeadows. There were lots of citizen military forces, today's equivalent of the Army Reserve, part-time units, but they couldn't have responded so rapidly, and nor could they have responded in such a large number. I've come to the conclusion that the first people to respond to the incident at Westall would have been civilians of some sort, quasi-civilians, probably working for defence, and probably wearing the sort of work dress that civilians working for, say, the Department of Supply, say, the research and development establishments of the period, the sort of work dress that those personnel wore.
I discovered that other people in uniform were seen in the area on the day of the sighting. Les Medju went to the Grange with his younger sister, but they saw what seemed to be a different unit.
We hid behind this tree, but fortunately this tree, the branches came down to the ground. Here we are, crouched down on our knees, and we can only look every so often as this tractor came around. He was on guard duty. This was a farmer who's decided to help out. We observed 2 army trucks, 2 men in camouflage, and 2 men in blue uniforms.
We better cover this area.
And it appeared that a soldier was using a metal mine detector. He's walking around sweeping back and forth.
Keep down, they'll see
The
us.
next time I see them, they turned and they started kicking violently at the ground. The 2 officers decide then, time to come back. They come back to the truck and they were gone, and then we could enter the paddock.
Les.
We had no idea what we were walking into. We didn't know what those army men were doing, and all I can say, it was just, what is this?
Les.
To have the army there and all the rest of it, it was something important.
They certainly were not Australian, because Australians were not using camouflage uniforms in those days, in the mid-60s. Nor would they have been British. But the description of the uniforms certainly matches those worn by the United States Air Force in the mid-1960s.
There were American military and intelligence personnel in Australia in 1966 as part of the Vietnam War effort. The Cold War between the USA and the Soviet Union was in full swing, extending across the world and even into outer space.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The space race between the superpowers fueled the public imagination at all levels.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris.
The fascination with flying saucers persisted all over the world. Australia was no exception.
Well, so far, I haven't seen anything even vaguely resembling a flying saucer or even a flying cigar. But thousands of people, in fact millions, do believe they exist. What do you think they are?
They are real, anyway. They come from the other planets. Some of them might come from the centre of the Earth.
I haven't seen one close up yet. This is what I'm looking forward to one day.
You took a step towards the figures and the object.
We used to invite people who reported sightings to talk about the experience, because if the sighting was a dramatic one, they would feel, I just need to talk to somebody. But if I discuss it with my friends, they say, what have you been drinking? But they needed to talk to somebody who would take them seriously.
Although society members tried to investigate at Westall, they came up against a wall of silence. All they can now find in their files is a couple of photographs and a sighting report filled in at the time by one of my student witnesses, Joy Tai. They also went to Moorabbin Airport to look for the pilots of the aircraft that apparently chased the UFO, but nobody came forward. I decided to do my own investigation. I contacted a retired air traffic controller to find out how a UFO and several light planes could fly so close to each other without a report being made. Who was responsible for controlling the airspace?
Moorabbin Tower was responsible for the area within a 5-mile radius of Moorabbin and up to 3,000 feet. And above that, it was the responsibility of Essendon Approach. If you're in a tower, you have the aircraft in sight all the time. 5 aircraft on the edge of their airspace, 5 by the way, in broad daylight, they should have been able to see. They may have found something that they thought shouldn't be made public and therefore hushed up.
There is evidence that the American government wanted to stifle debate about UFOs. They set up a committee to objectively investigate UFOs, but a leaked memo revealed that the whole investigation was a sham. The government's most vocal critic was the top atmospheric scientist, Professor James MacDonald.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime, punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.
In Australia, we followed the American policy of ridiculing UFOs, so I started searching for other sightings that might have happened around the same time as Westall. I discovered that 4 days before Westall, a witness took a photo from his backyard in Melbourne that matched descriptions of the object above Westall. Then, just 2 days before Westall, Ron Sullivan was driving in central Victoria when he noticed a strange light display in front of him.
Got up towards it and holy moly, the whole thing lit up and the 10-foot area at the bottom sort of come up and met the top, and the headlights of the car was the biggest awesome thing I've ever seen. They just pulled to the right as if they were magnetised. I could see all the trees on the right-hand side of the road lighting up, and I said, get out of this rod, and I pulled on the left. And I could feel the back left wheel spinning, and I got out of that.
Ron only reported the incident after he heard that a young man died when his car collided with the same tree Ron had narrowly missed 2 days earlier.
A couple of people from government departments came and visited me. I know one was from the Air Force. They looked at the car, just walked around. I said, well, let's know what you find out. And they said, yeah, we will, Mr. Sullivan. Never heard any more about it.
When I checked out the Royal Australian Air Force's list of UFO sightings for 1966, none of these cases were mentioned, though we know they investigated them. It took 16 years for records to be made available to UFO researchers.
They knew what I wanted to look for, and when I arrived, there was a body of files there that consisted of a couple of very large postal sacks. I kept requesting more and more files, and ultimately I got to a point where I examined a continuity of files that satisfied me that I was seeing a comprehensive picture of the RWF investigation at that time. I had a shopping list of things that I was focused on, and one of the key cases that I wanted to find out about was the Westall case. And surprising, with the rest of the shopping list I was fairly successful, but the Westall case, given that there seemed to be literally at least hundreds of people involved with it that had media attention at the time, there appeared to be evidence that there was a military investigation at the time. There was no Westall file.
The disclosure team was between about 6 and 9 people over the years. As you can imagine, a 4 or 5 year project, as it turned out, needed quite a lot of effort. Literally, it was looking through hundreds and hundreds of file titles, maybe even thousands in the end. Along the way, we were always looking for files on the Westall incident from '66. We started off with the Air Force, but within the Department of Defence, we also checked out files belonging to the Air Board, unit files from Air Force bases, former Department of Civil Aviation, Air Safety Bureau, CSIRO, intelligence files, ASIO. But the net result is we found nothing in this mammoth volume of government documentation which would even begin to be a hint that there was something about Westall in the government files. So, amazingly, we drew a blank.
The Westall sighting had clearly been erased from the record, but why? I hoped some publicity would draw former authorities out of the woodwork.
I'm Shane. Channel 10, nice to meet you, Shane. Joy, is that Mark Howe from Channel 10? Nice to meet you.
What we're really trying to get now is the people who are here as police, as soldiers, as scientists perhaps, looking close up at what was on the ground.
Some closure, Joy. How would you get some closure on this?
One thing that we would really like would be that someone either from the police or the military would come forward and say, yes, they were there.
Nobody from the authorities contacted me, but another witness did. Kevin Hurley saw the circles at the Grange on the day of the sighting and went back the next day for another look.
Then when we came to the area where we'd gone through the paddock, there was the Air Force of the Army, a whole group of them there, stopping us from going through into the paddock. Don't come near this in this area, and we just headed off back home.
And did they give you any reason why you couldn't come through?
No. There were vehicles on the paddock, and they had some sort of instrument which at the time I thought looked like Geiger counters. The strong memory I've got is what happened after that. About a week later, I decided to go back again to have another look. As soon as we got down to where the paddock started, all the grass had been cut, which was quite disturbing.
Wow.
So then we walked through that area to where the circles were, and when we got into the area where the circles were previously, the whole area had been burnt, destroying all evidence.
You asked me whether an R&D establishment would destroy evidence. Yes, of course they would. Bearing in mind that in the 1960s, Australia had great success financially with some of the first people to respond to the incident at Westall would have been civilians of some sort, quasi-civilians, probably working for defence, and probably wearing the sort of work dress that civilians working for, say, the Department of Supply, say, the research and development establishments of the period, the sort of work dress that those personnel wore.
I discovered that other people...
This was a farmer who's decided to help out. We observed 2 army trucks, 2 men in camouflage and 2 men in blue uniforms.
We better cover this area.
And it appeared that a soldier was using a metal mine detector. He's walking around sweeping back and forth.
Keep down, they'll see
The next time I see them, they turned and they started kicking violently at the ground. The 2 officers decide then, time to come back. They come back to the truck and they were gone, and then we could enter the paddock.
Les.
We had no idea what we'd all walked into. We didn't know what those army men were doing, and all I can say, it was just, what is this?
Deployable troops available in Melbourne at the time. The main units were all logistic, the supply battalions and so forth at places like Broadmeadows. There were lots of citizen military forces, today's equivalent of the Army Reserve, part-time units, but they couldn't have responded so rapidly, and nor could they have responded in such a large number. I've come to the conclusion that
in uniform were seen in the area on the day of the sighting. Les Medju went to the Grange with his younger sister, but they saw what seemed to be a different unit.
We hid behind this tree, but fortunately this tree, the branches came down to the ground. Here we are, crouched down on our knees, and we can only look every so often as this tractor came around. He was on guard duty.